One lottery ticket makes a big difference for our state students. And when I say big, I mean bigger than jackpot big. Since 2002, South Carolina students have benefited from more than $6 billion in lottery-funded scholarships and grants, including the Life, Hope, and Palmetto Fellow Scholarships. With every lottery play, you're supporting our students, and that adds up in a big way. That's why education is our middle name. Learn more at sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions.
It's over! Fly, Eagles, fly!
Celebrate the big win with the official licensed Super Bowl champions gear. Available now at NFLshop.com.
The Eagles win it! Super Bowl 59!
From jerseys to hats to must-have collectibles, we've got everything you need to rep your team with pride. Don't wait. These styles won't last. Shop now at NFLshop.com and gear up like a champion.
Ever wondered what it feels like to be a gladiator, facing a roaring crowd and potential death in the Colosseum? Find out on the Ancients podcast from History Hit. Twice a week, join me, Tristan Hughes, as I hear exciting new research about people living thousands of years ago, from the Babylonians to the Celts to the Romans, and visit the ancient sites which reveal who and just how amazing our distant ancestors were. That's the Ancients from History Hit.
Field Yates handles fantasy football and is an NFL draft analyst for the ESPN family. Field, Jordan Reed, Matt Miller, OG Mel Kiper. The mothership still rules the roost with all of that. And please follow our next Combine Covenant guest via Twitter, if you are so inclined, at Field Yates. Field, it's Paul Allen, and truly, it's excellent meeting you, ma'am.
Hey, right back to you. Thanks for having me on. Always love hearing your iconic call, so it's a real thrill to be on with you talking to Combine, which I know that the draft coverage has become almost a 365-day-a-year event, but it truly feels like the energy is shifting this week specifically as people are realizing how much 2 months from right now, which is when the NFL draft begins, can totally reshape the franchise's fortunes. And there are some teams that are saying to themselves, man, it looked real good last year, but it can with one good draft, which we are now just 2 months away from.
No doubt, my brother, and thanks for the nice words. And by the way, the genesis of this confab involves meat sauce from the Power Trip Morning Show. He complimented Field on X. Field responded. So I gravy trained the moment and asked Field to join. He accepted, and here we are. And honestly, this all personifies congeniality, don't you think?
Absolutely. Big shout out to him, by the way. And baby Louie, who I got to tell you, my kids are, I don't know exactly how many months old Louie is, but I think he's got my 1.5-year-old by a few pounds already. So Louie might be a starting linebacker for Brian Flores in about 20 years. Although Flo will probably have already gone on to become a head coach and a successful one at that for some other NFL franchise over the next 20 years. But the prospects are very bright.
Hey, Sauce, Louie got a mention from Field Yates. That's really cool. Since Sauce triggered this get-together, he provided me 3 draft-related questions to pose, and that's next. But first, your name, all right? Field Minister Yates. Field, why were you given such a regal name? That there has to be a story behind that. It's a beautiful name.
There certainly aren't too many of us out there. I've met a couple of Fieldings, or there was a very popular band in my youth, Korn, which I'm sure many of the listeners recall. So there was Fieldy, Korn. But my parents both very interested in having unique names across. I'm one of 3 kids, and my sister is Caddy, like a golf caddy. My brother, who's almost 40, is Taylor, and that was 40 years ago. Taylor was a somewhat unique name, but my name was always one that had been like a middle name in our family, and my mom especially was championing the idea of just going with Field. It was quite foresight for her, as it's fairly relevant to the work that we do these days. It feels like a sporting name. Unfortunately, I didn't get all the athletic traits that you would imagine a guy named Field might have, but everything else worked out okay. And then Minister is my mother's maiden name. That one's a little bit more straight and to the point, but still a name that I carry with a lot of pride nonetheless.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing. All right, Minister, Time to preach about the draft. First three courtesy of my surrogate, Paulie Lambert, father to Louie. Number one, is this the weakest quarterback draft in recent memory, and what do you think of it?
Yeah, I think it's better than the year in which we had Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis and Desmond Ridder, which was 2022. But I don't think it's a clear-cut, obvious, you're going to find your future quarterback in this draft. And it's such an interesting parallel because while the succeeding year to a draft is not the only one that matters. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it doesn't matter, right? What happened last year is done and in the past. But it's hard not to think about last year's class and the fact that we had 6 in the first 12 selections. And I think back to guys like Brock Bowers falling down the board to 13, and you're saying to yourself, how could a guy who went on to have the greatest rookie season for a tight end ever, unless you want to count Mike Ditka's 14-game season back in the day, which was ridiculous as well, fall to 13th? And it's like, well, there were 6 quarterbacks that went in the first 12 picks. And if you're good enough at quarterback, you're going to go really high. I think this, and this is my own personal evaluation. We'll see how much things change over the next 2 months. For me, I don't anticipate them changing a whole lot. I think that Cam Ward is a justifiable number 1 pick in the context of this class with the other quarterbacks and where Tennessee is right now, which is without a quarterback solution. But I don't think he would have been anywhere close to the number 1 pick a year ago. JJ, of course, was the 5th quarterback taken. He was the 4th quarterback on my board last year. I'm not sure Cam Ward would have gone ahead of JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix Jr. or Bo Nix last season. Not to say he isn't a solid prospect, but when you have the number 1 pick and you're taking a quarterback, you're looking for a guy that in a couple or 3 years reshapes the fortunes of your franchise. And I don't think that Cam Ward is as good of a bet as some of the guys that have gone number 1 overall in the past, let's call it a half dozen years have been.
Ain't no doubt about that. Then you have the polarizing Shedeur Sanders, who outside of the interviews is doing nothing at the combine. That was reported recently, and Dion is pulling all of the strings here, I would imagine, and rightfully so because he's so experienced at so many levels. But Shedeur's approach to the combine and just his overall skill set. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that we need to live in a world more frequently, and this may be why I will never have I most likely never have a 4-hour sports radio show myself, is that like you can disagree with someone, but also understand someone's perspective, right? Mm-hmm. You can not like something, but also understand it. So yeah, maybe this is, my background prior to ESPN is working in scouting, having a cup of coffee there. And so I would have loved to see Shedeur out there throwing this week. I would have liked to see every quarterback out there throwing this week. I'm not sure that he'll be the only one that won't participate in the throwing event. But we're in a different world now. We are in a different world of the NFL Combine, to the point that I've talked to people in the NFL that are concerned about what the future of the event looks like. I'm talking about scouts, not the league itself. I mean, last year, Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors didn't even measure at the combine, much less take part in the drills, right? So and they went on to have, in the case of Malik Neighbors, one of the great rookie seasons we've ever seen for a wide receiver. And then in the case of Jaden Daniels, arguably the greatest rookie quarterback season in the history of the game. So if those guys are no worse for the wear by skipping out on those portions of the combine, I think there's a chance that we see more and more top-tier prospects go that route. Meanwhile, my personal opinion would be there is value in throwing, and it is because the name of this event, not the combine, but the draft, is how do you stack up relative to other options at your position, because that's going to determine how high you go. So I don't have a major cataclysmic issue with it, but in my own personal perfect world, I would love for all the quarterbacks to be throwing. As far as the skill set for Shedeur, just a beautiful pocket passer with time and space. It's as good as any player in the entire class at the quarterback position. Has tremendous experience, which we saw 2 quarterbacks last year with 5 full years of starting experience at the college level have great early success in both Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. He is a fine athlete. I think that for those that maybe didn't watch him during the college seasons or just aren't as familiar, like you might think Deion Sanders' son is this superlative athlete. He's not that. He's fine, but mobility is not. He's not going to change the game with his mobility in the way that many of the other quarterback prospects that we've seen in recent years have been. The biggest question mark that I have for Shedeur is probably 2-pronged. One, accurate, very good touch, very good ball placement in general. Not a rocket arm, right? This is a probably average arm strength by NFL quarterback standards. And then I think he needs to play a bit more urgently in the pocket. He led FBS in sacks taken last year, which, to be clear, was in large part due to an offensive line that was better than 2023, but still not great for Colorado. But he also, I think, has this tendency to try to prolong plays a half count too far, and that results in maybe not just a sack, but a bad sack. There's a big difference, in my opinion, between a 4-yard sack and a 12-yard sack, and I feel like Shedeur has to refine that area of his game. Sometimes the half bad play is better than the really bad play.
That context was elite. Thank you very much for that, Field Yates, ESPN, and with the Sanders name and the Sanders family, the less ballyhooed Sanders would be Shiloh. Would you consider him a middle of the road safety?
I think he probably has. I think if he gets drafted, it's somewhere late in day 3. Right. The combine and the non-combine invites, and then the draft process. I mean, Ivan Pace is a good recent example in Minnesota of an undrafted guy who's made a huge mark on the team. He wasn't even drafted. But Shiloh not being invited to the combine is, I think, a little bit reflective of where the league has him. There are a couple of guys that I was surprised were not invited to the combine that I have what I would determine a draftable grade on them. Shiloh probably is back end of day 3. He'll be somewhere on a roster at some point. I am just not totally convinced that he'll be in the draft process itself. But still, I would say that whether you're drafted or not drafted, just to have 2 children make the NFL on a roster for however long it lasts is an unbelievable accomplishment, no matter how they arrive there.
Number 2 from the Saucy, the genesis of this chat with Field Yates from ESPN. Is Abdul Carter the best player in the draft, and if so, why?
Yeah, it's one thing that, and maybe I need to refine my sword a little bit when it comes to, some of these combative, this or that arguments is I believe that Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are in a tier by themselves. I might view it as, what do you need? What are you looking for? But in a vacuum, I think there are going to be probably more teams with Abdul Carter having a higher grade. More teams that if they were in the Titans position with the first pick in the draft and they already had a quarterback, or they did not feel as though the options this year, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders most notably, warranted number 1 overall pick consideration, they would take Abdul Carter over Travis Hunter. But not all of them. And so I've maintained Travis Hunter as my number 1 overall prospect just because I really do believe there is Pro Bowl caliber ability on both sides of the ball. I'm more bullish on him as a wide receiver than as a corner. There have been many people, smart people like my colleagues, Jordan and Matt and Mel, that you talked about. Jordan, I know, has been banging this drum for a while, is that maybe the most logical path for him is a full-time corner and a part-time wide receiver. It's harder to find elite corners than it is to find elite wide receivers. That being said, and I don't need to tell you this, when you have a truly transcendent talent at wide receiver, it totally shifts the way in which a defense plays against your offense. And I'm not saying that Travis Hunter is Justin Jefferson. I don't know that anybody is. I'm just saying that if there is a developmental arc that can get him into the neighborhood of elite wide receiver 1 status, which I believe there is, I don't think that is a less valuable role relative to a top pass rusher that we should shut the door on Hunter playing the majority of the snaps at wide receiver and some snaps at cornerback.
What about a team getting super crafty? It's risky, but it would be clever, coy, and crafty to try to get Travis Hunter to win offensive and defensive rookie of the year.
We have seen, and this happens more in the NBA, where midway through the season, they start marketing campaigns, and every reporter that shows up at the stadium gets a little pamphlet that says, hey, whatever it is, Travis Hunter for rookie of the year, and here are the 10 stats that tell the story that you need to know. I think there's using history as a data point, I think is useful because we got a lot of years that we can look back upon. I know that there's basically zero precedent to go both ways. We've had guys that have been two-way products or two-way standouts at different points of their football career. Patrick Peterson, Chris Gamble from Ohio State, who ended up getting drafted by the Panthers. But Gamble had kind of declared one side of the ball by the end of his college career. It's been a long time. Even Charles Woodson was more of a defensive player than he was an offensive player. I just don't know. And Mel probably is the exact right person to ask this question because he's been doing this for 47 years, remarkably. I just don't know that we've had a guy like Travis Hunter who the endurance that is required to play both sides of the ball is so special that I'm not betting against him. And I know that many people are going to want to sort of state the case. He's going to be this first and that second, whether it's corner first or wide receiver first and the opposite second. One of the most important things that I have tried to talk about with Travis Hunter, and I'll reiterate here, is that when you're talking about drafting him, obviously the physical traits are unique. That's why he's able to play both ways. But something that scouts have consistently talked about with me and it's hard to know when you're not visiting the school and going into meeting rooms or at least speaking to people, maybe not the head coaches, but you're talking to the assistant wide receiver coach or the strength and conditioning coach, whatever it might be, is they have just they have complete reverence for Travis Hunter's work ethic and determination. And they say basically like, the guy's playing 115 snaps a game. Like, do you understand the mental sharpness it takes to learn two positions at a high level and the determination it takes to keep yourself in the physical condition required to play that many snaps? Like, that's just hard to do. By the way, he's playing his home games at altitude. He's playing some of his away games now that they're in the Big 12 in Texas or Florida in the middle of September. He's a really rare specimen. So I'm not discounting the possibility of him playing both ways and being a high-level performer to the point that he could be in that conversation for offensive and defensive rookie of the year.
Hey, Field, do you formulate big opinions off film watching or steam gathering from reliable and trustworthy sources?
Yeah, I use the film as the start. That's my starting point. Is that and that process begins, and it begins May for the following draft. Like, we'll take the few days after the draft to kind of catch up on what took place and really process. Like, the Vikings took J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner, and okay, got it. Now I understand what the team might look like. But it begins in earnest, and obviously so much can change from the beginning of going into a player's final college season to the end of his college career. But that's the starting point. And then I'm talking to scouts almost literally every day, but during the season, you start to really dive into, okay, what are you guys hearing on the player, on the human? What are the injury concerns, right? We're going to go to Indianapolis this week, and some guys are going to get flagged. You're going to find out, hey, this guy that I had a big grade on, he might not go in the first 12 picks anymore because he's got a medical red flag that maybe he's more like a top 20 pick. And that information process will continue all the way up until the days before the draft, really even the day of the draft. So I try to use the film as really the foundation of what I am seeing and what I am saying. But it would be, to me, irresponsible to not, if you have the means to do so, try to get some context from the league, because there is always information. But scouts who are grinding on these players 365 days a year and driving to locations all over the country, some of them very remote, and sometimes going to small schools to find a guy who might get drafted. Heck, one of my favorite day 3 prospects last year, Levi Drake Rodriguez, the great Minnesota Vikings 7th-round pick, who I still have optimism for. Every week when the inactives came out, he was a healthy scratch. I was saying to myself, one day LDR is going to be on the active roster and make his mark. But that's a remote school in, I believe it's called Waxahachie, Texas.
Right.
Scouts are putting the time in there to go find these hidden gems. So I think that their context and their insight is very, very valuable.
Now, Field, lastly, number 3, at the running back class and how deep and rich supposedly it is and how ballyhooed some of these backs are. Teams, and you know this, but teams with good running backs and tight ends, they've done a lot of damage in the National Football League for a long, long time. So do you sense in any way teams are starting to fade wide receivers a little bit?
If they are, I think it's crazy business. I really do. And I think this year is a good testament to it. I know that everybody has talked about it, but let me just reiterate how exceptional this draft class is. Getting ready for the combine these past few days, I've been trying to sort of revisit some of my players, and I dove in on 3 separate running backs last night. That I don't think they're certainly not day 1 guys. Maybe not day 2 guys. Maybe one of them will make it into day 2, but they're probably day 3 guys. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, three names. I'll give you the three names. Kyle Monongai, who's the starting running back for Rutgers, who in 4 years never fumbled. The guy led the Big Ten in rushing 2 years ago, second in scrimmage yards this past year in the Big Ten, which, as you know, loaded conference. Then you go to Damian Martinez, who spent one season at Miami after 3 at Oregon State, where he was the offense there. The guy's a good-looking player, had a long 60-plus yard run in the bowl game to kind of seal his college career. And then Ja'Cory Crosby-Merritt, who played at Alabama State for 4 years, then went to New Mexico for a season, then played one game for Arizona this past year. He was a highly touted transfer, and then was ruled ineligible for the rest of the season. He had this great Shrine Bowl with 2 touchdowns, over 100 rushing yards, and you're like, all 3 of these guys could play on Sundays right now. But if there's 35 of those guys in this year's draft class, I'm the team that's saying, grab the good wide receivers early where you can get them. Not that the Vikings have a wide receiver issue, but, I don't know what happens with Aaron Jones here over these next couple of weeks. It sure seems like the team and the player are interested in finding some middle ground to bring him back. But even if they do, and even with Cam Akers and Ty Chandler playing the way they did last year, I think every NFL team would be at least wise to think about a day 3 running back, because the class is really, really exceptional.
NFL draft analyst Field Yates with a Combine Covenant, 9 to noon. And you can follow him via Twitter at Field Yates. A few more here to close. So say the Vikings stay at 24. In Field's latest YouTube mock, it's defensive tackle Derek Harmon to Minnesota. Why do you like that one?
Yeah, to me, Harmon would be sort of this, as we know, the past couple of years, the way that the Vikings have deployed their defensive tackles has been very, very interesting. A couple of seasons ago, light on overall defensive tackle deployment. But what we didn't see a lot of this past season was pure sack production from the defensive tackle spot. And sacks can be a bit of a misleading number because, there's more to the play than just who finishes with the sack. Sometimes it's somebody else does the dirty work, and a player falls on the quarterback for a sack, right? But they all count just the same. But the sack production was modest this past year. Derek Harmon led all defensive tackles in the FBS in pressures in his one season at Oregon. He played 2 years prior to that at Michigan State. He's a Midwest kid, so I guess it would be kind of a homecoming of sorts there. But I think there's more to him than just rushing the passer. He is big. I mean, this guy is mountainous. He is a hard player to miss, but a very good athlete. He's got tremendous strength at the point of attack. Big fan of the player and the way that he broke out this past season. So thinking about not just what the Vikings need now, but what they might need in the future, continuing to attack that interior of the defensive line, because we saw, I don't know how much better you can do than in free agency than the 2 edge signings they made last year in John Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel. But to have a couple of guys to help you attack from different angles along that defensive front and that Brian Flores team, something I'd be a big fan of. I understand their draft capital was limited. That being said, the Vikings do have opportunities to really enhance this already very good roster.
So what is so eye-opening with college defensive tackles this draft? Because position flexibility, as you know, is so important. And you can be a nose or a 3 technique in college, then all of a sudden you're a defensive end in the National Football League. Some of these guys get moved to edge. But overall, as what they did in college, these defensive tackles, what are you liking so much?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that we're seeing is you got to go back to not this past offseason, but the offseason prior to that. And we saw this explosion of the defensive tackle market. Guys like Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne and Quinn Williams. And we saw this past year Chris Jones, but prior to that, Derek Brown for the Carolina Panthers and Christian Wilkins for the Raiders this past offseason. But the ball really started getting rolling 2 years ago. And the common thread amongst those highly paid defensive tackles is this. They all can rush the passer. And this year, you've got that same dynamic in play. There are some guys that are going to make their money stuffing the run, but these players that can disrupt the passer, I just think are so valuable for a lot of reasons. One, as we know, you put a quarterback under duress, even the very best. We saw it in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs had no answer for the Eagles pass rush, and regardless of how brilliant Patrick Mahomes was, they were basically playing with 2 hands tied behind their back on offense. So you can rush the passer, you've got a real chance. And I think what's really cool about this defensive tackle and running back class too, but just to focus on the defensive tackles, is you've got different shapes and sizes. I mean, even Michigan itself has 2 defensive tackles that I think are locks to go in the first round, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Kenneth Grant is gigantic. he was, and we'll see for sure what his actual weight is this week in Indianapolis. But yeah, it might be closer to 340 than it is 330, and the guy can really move. Mason Graham, his teammate, looks small next to him because he might be like only 317 pounds. So you've got guys of all different shapes, sizes. Derek Harmon, who I mentioned from Oregon in my mock. I mean, this guy looks like he could play basketball. He could grab you some rebounds for the Timberwolves right now with his length. You've got guys of all different shapes and sizes with so many pass rushers. And in today's NFL, if you can rush the passer, you've got a real chance to not just be drafted early, but eventually one day make a ton of money as a defensive tackle.
Lastly, my man, and locally with the Golden Gophers, Ariante Ursary and Ja Joyner, plus some others. Yep. The Gophers have some good guys heading into the draft. What do you think?
Yeah, Justin Wally is talking. I was looking at some of his tape last night as well. Ursary is going to be the first one taken for sure this year from the Gophers. And I just would say this, and you see it on tape, but one of the values of going to the Senior Bowl and for scouts who are going to the games throughout the year is like you appreciate a little more when you actually see them in person. It's like Ursary is just huge, right? He's just massive. Like just to get around him takes time. So, but he's not lumbering. It's not a lumbering, heavy-footed left tackle who you find a twitchy edge rusher who can just bend and get around him. No, he's big. He's got some athletic skill as well, and Abdul Carter, we talked about him a little earlier, is like, could this be the number one player in the draft? It's certainly a close debate. Watch his game against Minnesota this past year. It wasn't a whole lot going on.
Right.
So Ursary stood the test against the toughest test. That alone is evidence you got a chance to be, I think, probably somewhere in like the I tend to be more range specific than like round specific. Like I think like 30 to 50 is probably the range for Ariante Ursary.
Yeah.
Ja Joyner had a big year a couple of years ago. This past season, the sack production was down. Has really good length though, and just knows how to rush. Saw him down there at the Senior Bowl as well. I think he probably checks in like early day 3 would be my forecast right now for Ja Joyner, but a guy who obviously helped contribute to a lot of impact plays on the defensive side of the ball over his time, or during his time with the Gophers. Justin Wally I mentioned as well. There are a few others. I mean, this team, they've done a nice job with this program. This is Coach Fletch. That's what he's doing in terms of Coach Fletch knows what he's doing in terms of his, recruiting and also getting guys to develop into, NFL caliber prospects.
Field Yates, ESPN draft analyst, with some high-end knowledge shared via the 2025 NFL Combine. Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, 25 minutes from now on this radio show from the Indianapolis Convention Center and the National Football League Combine. And we're into the second half of the presentation around the corner on KFAN.
The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions.
It's over! Fly, Eagles, fly!
Celebrate the big win with the official licensed Super Bowl champions gear. Available now at NFLShop.com.
The Eagles win it! Super Bowl 59!
From jerseys to hats to must-have collectibles, we've got everything you need to rep your team with pride. Don't wait. These styles won't last. Shop now at NFLShop.com and gear up like a champion.
Just drives me absolutely batty.
59th time's the charm.
The game is over.
Now, what did I do wrong?
Good stuff.
What in the ham fat is going on with you guys?
Got too many men out there.
Tatum, Everett, Vikings Entertainment Network, Vikings.com. What's going on?
What's going on? It's a fun morning.
What's been fun about it?
Are you not having fun?
I'm having a great time, but we're trying to get squared away with your morning.
I mean, it's a mini reunion for me. I see a lot of familiar faces from around the league, from my time as a broadcaster, a lot of old friends from that small community, it turns out. And it's been good. Talked to Pete Prisco a second ago. You know, he just came out with his article on the top 100 prospects in this free agency, and number one, Sam Darnold.
Really?
Yeah.
For free agency?
Yeah, for free agency. Yes.
Right on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pete's been at a million combines, and
he said like 30-something.
He's really, really deeply rooted with a lot of general managers and stuff. So that'll be at Vikings.com.
It'll be at Vikings.com. Yes, it will. He's got some interesting views on what the Vikings should do regarding the quarterback. Obviously, that's like the biggest talker here. I feel like that's what keeps coming up.
I mean, if that's consensus,
hey, go ahead.
That's exactly what the league thinks about it. Then you're talking franchise, perhaps maybe do something where teams are going to be much more apt to pay the fee to bring him in.
Right.
If you go ahead and exclusive, put a different tag or that type of tag on him.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, starting March 4th, that's when all that kind of comes to a head. So until then, it's just kind of a waiting game to see what happens. And I think a lot of those conversations get made here. That's no secret that they're, the agents are here, front offices are here, and it's a lot of conversations kind of get started, I think, at the Combine, Senior Bowl, all those kind of things, because everyone's all in one place.
No doubt.
Deals get made here. It's kind of a cool feeling.
Yeah, unless you get caught.
That's fair.
Because it's that's like that's the proverbial dirty little secret here is the late night meetings and people trying to get squared away on free agency, which you're really not supposed to do. That's why they created that legal tampering window right up to free agency, which by the way, everything's coming at us so quickly. The free agency's in 2 weeks. Yeah. The draft is in 2 months. And, the Combine, with the Super Bowl being later, the Combine's a little later, too. So when you get into these interviews that we'll watch at Vikings.com, Pete Prisco and some others coming up over the next few days, do you find yourself focusing more on the rookies coming into the draft or like free agency speculation, or does it really just depend on the guest?
It does depend on the guest. So, I know you spoke to Jordan Reed earlier. We're going to have him on again. And I think he's such a knowledgeable source on the draft. So you really want to pick Jordan's brain on, you've got those 2 5th-round picks. Where can they find value at that? What direction should they go with the first-round draft pick? So that's kind of what I usually do. I target their specialty. With Pete, it's a lot on free agency and what he thinks they should do as far as like positional need. When you get guys like Robert Mays, he'll be from The Athletic. He'll be with us tomorrow. You kind of target the whole thing. Like, you want to know, how do you see the Vikings moving on? Where's the foundation? Where are the holes, the needs? It's a lot of that kind of talk. But I'm actually pretty pumped because we are going to be able to talk to some of our front office guys who make a lot of the major decisions. Ryan Grigson, Demetrius Washington, they're going to be guys that we're also going to be talking to kind of get to know them a little bit better, because there's a lot of people that contribute to what the Vikings do when it comes to draft strategy and free agency. And I think that's kind of an interesting part too.
When you get a chance to talk with the national guys, what do they think about our season? What are their thoughts on just, because a lot of times they only saw the end of it, maybe didn't see the whole entire thing. But is it more of a theme of exceeding expectations throughout the year, or are they focused on the last couple of weeks? Because that's really where a lot of the national audience got to see the Vikings, and then they couldn't quite put the two together.
Yeah, how do you turn regular season success into postseason success is kind of a theme I think that will be talked about a lot when you go to these types of events like the Combine and the Draft and et cetera. But, a lot of what the national media is saying and the perception of the Vikings that I've realized is that they have they exceeded all expectations this season. I think it really was solidified when Kevin O'Connell won Coach of the Year. That's voted on. Yep. And so for people to see the job that he did, and I think that's what Coach of the Year is kind of turning into. Like, what was your lot heading into the season and what were you able to do with it? And so that's why, like Andy Reid, sure, they were like, the best team, blah, blah, blah. But then, regular season team, and then you don't get it because it's just expected, right? Yeah. So I think the perception is that they've exceeded, and now how do you sustain that? Because, there's a lot more question marks going into this season in the division, too. You've got the Bears with a new head coach, new coordinators. You've got the Lions with new coordinators. And so there's a lot of things up, or question marks as they head in there. And I think the Vikings will be more in those conversations heading into this year after the performance from last year. As long as they figure out the quarterback situation, I think that's what led people to not believe in what the Vikings could do last year. They just weren't sure about the quarterback.
Right.
So if we go into this with an unsure question mark at quarterback of the performance of whoever they decide upon, I think that's where the perception will change. It's really just goes down to what's under center.
And Kevin O'Connell joins this radio show 15 minutes from now. We'll follow you closely at Vikings.com and chat tomorrow if you have
thanks.
time. Okay.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate you. Tatum Everett, Vikings Entertainment Network from Indianapolis. This is 9 to noon.
The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions.
It's over! Fly, Eagles, fly!
Celebrate the big win with the official licensed Super Bowl champions gear. Available now at NFLShop.com.
The Eagles win it! Super Bowl 59!
From jerseys to hats to must-have collectibles, we've got everything you need to rep your team with pride. Don't wait. These styles won't last. Shop now at NFLShop.com and gear up like a champion.
Nordo, miss you, love you. Yes, I and we saw Ants block last night. What an unbelievable comeback against Oklahoma City. I fall asleep in the hotel room here, man. They're down like 20 points, and they ain't going to win the game. And then I wake up, and I'm checking out social, and damn, so good for the Minnesota Timberwolves. That was super cool. But we miss you here, and from Jordan Reed starting the Combine coverage into Colorado Buffalo's offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur, Field Yates, and so on with Kevin O'Connell about 10 minutes from now. Anything jump out at you?
Yeah, well, it jumps out to me that so far the conversations you and I have, I miss you and Pete. I love you and Pete as well. I'm back here in St. Louis Park. But the conversations we've had, PA, are kind of playing out early on. And over the course of your time in Indianapolis, I think there's going to be more steam and there'll be more opinions that we can build off of as we enter free agency in the draft. But just kind of what jumps out to me right off the bat, stark contrast to a year ago where super quarterback heavy, the getting was good. You had to go high to get these guys. We ultimately select J.J. McCarthy, 5-6 guys go in the first 12 picks. We know that. And the first defensive player, Leatu Latu, first guy off the board was like 15 or 16 to the Colts. And now you're talking with Jay Reed and these guys and Field Yates, this Abdul Carter cat, this depth of defensive tackle that kind of intrigues us. It's just been fun to hear it from those guys and in some ways kind of align with or affirm some of our perceptions into the draft. It's been super cool to hear from those guys. But that's where I'm sitting right now, how deep this thing is defensively and how much the Vikings, despite limited draft capital, as Jordan Reed really hit on in the open, the fact that this team has a good chance to get better with one of these guys in late April.
Right.
Yeah, in Nordo, I think the other intriguing part of this is just getting people's view on Sam Darnold and where do they see him. You look on The Athletic and you see him as a second-tier free agent, and then you hear other people talk about him and say he's the number one free agent this offseason. And that's something the Vikings have to really know and get right, because that could change how they approach and what they maybe attempt to do with Sam, and the fact that maybe you can get something. What we got out of Sam Darnold was a $10 million payday, or having to pay him $10 million, and got probably 30 to 40 out of him as a player. So we already benefited from him. Now, can we get any more out of? Can we squeeze that proverbial rock any more than we have? I just think the more that these teams think of him, and the higher they think of him, the more opportunity that there might be something there. Fingers crossed to help us with a low draft board.
Yeah, I think, and I know Pat Shurmur loves him, and he's so close to him. Shedeur Sanders, of course, at Colorado. Awesome chat, catching up with Pat Shurmur. The idea and the vibe with this draft class, though, is such that the stock of a Sam Darnold naturally is going to rise because of the light nature, maybe, in terms of impacting a team day one at the quarterback spot. So I'm with you, where it's like the fruits of Sam Darnold's labor, that translated to 14 wins. It translated to an unbelievable season. Kwesi's, this is up to Kwesi, and you guys are going to get to talk with the general manager. Excited to hear that. How can he thread the needle if it is a tag and trade type of opportunity? They have another couple of weeks, I think, to make that franchise tag decision. But how much can you get out of him? Did you get enough out of him? And what that stock in that market's going to look like? I think it's going to be fruitful for Sam this spring, though.
And in closing here, after Kevin O'Connell, who joins us within the next 6, 7, 8 minutes, he's en route from what we've been told. You're going to hear a playback interview with Bill Michaels from the Wisconsin Sports Network. He's Wisconsin Radio Immortality. This is the first time he's been to the Combine, and he came to the Combine, from what I understand, to get in front of general manager Brian Gutekunst and maybe some other members of the Packers, because he I don't know how he said it, or he drew a comparison between Jordan Love and Jeff Blake that really blew up negatively. There were racial connotations to it, and he explained it to us. That's coming up about 40 minutes from now. But when we return, Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, will join us at the 2025 NFL Combine on KFAN.
The lottery is not about getting rich. It's about helping people, and it always has been. The lottery is what helped raise the Great Wall of China, build the roads of Rome, and today in South Carolina, it's what generates millions of dollars each year for scholarships like the SC Hope, Life, and Palmetto Fellows. The South Carolina Education Lottery is investing in you. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou to learn more.
The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions.
It's over! Fly, Eagles, fly!
Celebrate the big win with the official licensed Super Bowl champions gear. Available now at NFLShop.com.
The Eagles win it! Super Bowl 59!
From jerseys to hats to must-have collectibles, we've got everything you need to rep your team with pride. Don't wait. These styles won't last. Shop now at NFLShop.com and gear up like a champion.
Ever wondered what it feels like to be a gladiator, facing a roaring crowd and potential death in the Colosseum? Find out on the Ancients podcast from History Hit. Twice a week, join me, Tristan Hughes, as I hear exciting new research about people living thousands of years ago, from the Babylonians to the Celts to the Romans, and visit the ancient sites which reveal who and just how amazing our distant ancestors were. That's the Ancients from History Hit,